Hi, my name is Gabriela Rojas, and this is my final presentation for Dr. Lee's World Civilizations 3 class at Tacoma Community College, summer 2020. So my topic is Mexico's New Industrial Revolution. My thesis is the bombing of 5 Mexican oil tankers plunged Mexico into World War II, boosting urbanization and a new industrial revolution within the country. Now you're probably thinking, how in the heck does the bombing of oil transportation boost urbanization and industrialization in a country? Well, we have to go a little bit further back than just World War II for this. So in the 1920s, Mexico is a powerhouse. They're declared the second largest producer of oil in the world. Now, the Great Depression caused a devastating blow to that title, as well as a lot of the factories and textile type productions throughout the country. Now, to help with the oil, you have President Lázaro Cárdenas, who nationalized Mexico's oil in 1938 to try and alleviate some of the issues. Well, Petróleos Mexicanos, as it became, or Pemex, a state-controlled monopoly, caused some issues between Mexico and the U.S. The United States had a lot of oil-rich properties in Mexico that they were using, and they lost those because of the nationalization. Well, Mexico compensated them and continued a trade with them with the oil industry. And it kind of alleviated some of the new tensions that were made. There was already about 100 years and 2 wars worth of tensions there. And so Mexico kind of needed to alleviate the new ones to not have more. In the years leading up to Mexico's involvement in World War II, we have small but active groups make up the conservative Mexicans and Germans banding together, and they make the Mexican Right. So Germany had a goal of getting Mexico to join smaller nations against larger imperialist nations like the U.S. and the Soviet Union. By capturing conservative fears, the right aimed to convince Mexican citizens that a communist takeover was possible. The Nazi Party would grow quietly in Mexico while under investigation by Allied forces. Inserting Nazi ideology into German colony schools, communities, and church groups would allow the party to grow and thrive quietly. The leftist political and labor groups in different areas caught wind of Nazi activity and wasted absolutely no time creating anti-fascist propaganda to recapture the Mexican mind. On the night of May 13th, 1942, the Mexican oil tanker Potrero de Llano was torpedoed en route to Mexico, or from Mexico to New York. Guilty of supplying the United States with oil, German submarine U-563 took down the tanker with hopes of disrupting that trade, and they were successful. Mexico would soon lose another 4 oil tankers in the months to come, killing around 40 Marines across the 5 attacks. Mexico was enraged. They demanded apology and compensation from Germany, and Germany said, well, you supplied the oil to the US, like you weren't staying neutral. So if you're helping my enemy, then you're my friend, basically. So Mexico's Senator Fernando Soto would declare Germany's offense an unspeakable attack that forces Mexico to declare war. So they didn't really have a say after that. Mexico had managed to stay off of the battlefield in World War II until these attacks. That first one sparked a surge of citizens to stand up in support for their country, and we start seeing propaganda and posters like this one popping up on both sides of the border. U.S. Ambassador Messerschmitt urged Franklin D. Roosevelt to listen and accept military insight from Mexico's President General Avila Camacho. Even the Mexican Foreign Secretary Ezequiel Pedillo had reached out to persuade other Latin American countries to side with the Allies. Following the creation of the Mexican North American Defense Committee, the Mexican military joined forces with the United States and experienced copious amounts of training together. And despite that, Mexican soldiers wouldn't really see much action overseas. Famously, the Mexican Air Force's own 201st Fighter Squadron, pictured here on the left, famously nicknamed the Aztec Eagles, would successfully aid the U.S. in the liberation of the Philippines from Japanese control. Noticing a prime opportunity in Mexico's declaration of war, the United States would introduce the Bracero program, bringing Mexican laborers to work in U.S. agriculture and build railroads. The program provided work opportunities for Mexico who had workers to spare because of the Great Depression causing such an impact on all of their textile and laborers already. A lot of the pre-war tensions thawed and the two countries became stronger allies. Later in the war, you would have Mexican Americans, like the one pictured on the right, who had a little bit of an easier time actually joining the military for the U.S. on behalf of the United States and by being a citizen. And a lot of these Mexican Americans, this is the first time that they've ever been called an American. Like, they have a military sergeant yelling at them and saying, "Americans don't slouch." And they're like, wow, no one's ever called me an American before. And so it's kind of a big turning point for Mexicans on both sides of the border. Prior to the war, President Avila Camacho and his administration created a 6-year plan, including themes of business and like brow-raising democracy. Camacho's administration used the Cardenas approach from the previous president, dividing Mexico's agricultural land amongst people. Post-war, on December 1st, 1946, Mexico elected their new president, Miguel Alemán Valdez, who would become the first civilian president after a long history of electing revolutionary generals. President Alemán unleashed a Reformation storm on Mexico, and within his first 31 days, 39 laws were passed. And I believe there was a record set where more than 10 of them were passed in a day. The country was introduced to a revamp on their executive branch, women's suffrage, social security reform, and an agricultural credit program. So after World War II, a secondary middle class was established. Alemán had to appeal to them. And he had already appealed to the upper class through monetary and business means, and the lower class through bracing support for farmers. But to appeal to the middle classes, he had to set up political reform to convince them that the previous party had several abuses against people that would end with him. Alemán shifted from the Cardenas approach to his own, involving supplying electric power, flood control, new land, becoming a center of regional agricultural industrial complex, and providing a downfall of economic nationalists. It put him in a favorable view for international businesses, and that really helped rebuild all of the factories and get to a point where Mexico was starting to thrive again. Now, going back to the Great Depression, Mexico didn't really have anywhere to go because they went straight from Depression shutdown to supporting the war effort. They didn't really have anywhere to go. So after the war, they're still kind of caught up with all of this old technology. Like, it's pretty ancient compared to what their neighbors up north have. So all of this trade and this new commerce allowed them to rebuild. Now, with all of these new jobs, you have Mexicans coming home from other countries, and they're like, hey, I can do that job. And so you see surges of people start settling in and around cities. Well, that needs them to expand. And with all of these new people coming home, Mexico sees their own baby boom. And with all of the new people and new mouths to feed, there are new jobs from the factories. And by the end of 1950, Mexico becomes known as one of the world's richest storehouses of non-ferrous materials. And their nationalized oil industry rises to become a primary producer of natural gas and petrochemicals. This allows the country to then expand with railroads and highways and airline connections to nearly every region, creating economic integration that President Alemán had actually hoped for. Some historians would even credit the ever-growing success of Mexico to the creation of more and bigger labor unions within cities, like the Confederation of Mexican Workers actually was instrumental in supporting the official policy of import substitution. So labor unions allowed the lower and middle classes to have a resource in helping them take control of their lives and work. Although these 5 Mexican oil tankers and several lives were lost, the events mixed with Mexico's pride would plunge them into World War II, boosting that urbanization and industrial revolution. Plagued by political games, Mexico was brought into a new stage of urbanization by becoming progressive or just less conservative. Through women's suffrage, labor unions, and the creation of job factories, Mexico was able to build upon itself. Urbanizing came naturally with progress, which came naturally by rebuilding after being on the winning side of the war. This industrial revolution was made possible by Mexico's affiliation with oil and steel. Being able to give something for knowledge and partnership allowed Mexico to industrialize by improving travel, building factories, and improving that international trading commerce. So surviving a world war and keeping that progressive momentum going gave Mexico the spark it needed to continue building upon itself and move forward.